Welcome everyone. Welcome to our second bootcamp related to DefInSpace 2023. We're really happy to see you today with us. My name is Michael Jourdain. I'm the project manager for DefInSpace 2023. We had already two presentations regarding DefInSpace, but this bootcamp now will help you, like the previous one, to think, to work already, to have some ideas about what is expected of you for this hackathon happening on the 17th and 18th of November. So it will help you regarding the two challenges that have been created by the French Space Command. So for the second bootcamp, I'm really happy to welcome around the table a few people. So from French Space Command, we have Lieutenant Colonel Nicolas and Major Pascal. And we have from CNRS, we have Mrs. Mme Sourbes-Verger, and we have, who is a senior researcher from CNRS, and we have Mrs. DeLaCasa from CNES, who's also here with us today. So hi everyone, and thank you for being here. So what you will see today during this webinar, this bootcamp number 2, is first, we will, again, if you have seen it in the previous bootcamp or in the previous webinar, we will check the teaser for DefInSpace 2023. It's still brand new for us. So we will share it with you. Then there will be the presentation from Mrs. Sourbes-Verger about the state of space in the world from a political perspective. You will have the opportunity to ask questions in the little GoToWebinar box during her presentation, and we will then ask the questions to her after her presentation. So feel free to ask your questions during her presentation. After this first presentation, there will be a second one from Mrs. DeLaCasa, which is called Tips to Pitch to Investors. So this will help you a lot also regarding the future challenges you will have to work on. A few questions maybe to ask her at the end of her presentations, and she will answer you. And then there will be a recorded presentation from the French Space Command by Commissioner Anne-Sophie. As I said, this presentation has been recorded, and the theme is space law. Okay, so this is 3 presentations today, so you're very lucky. And at the end of this, I will close the webinar. So from now to 2 p.m., just enjoy and make the most of those three presentations, very different ones from one another, sorry. And before starting, let's just enjoy the teaser for DefInSpace 2023, and then we'll follow by Mrs. Sourbes-Verger. Thank you very much. Okay, so we hope you enjoyed this teaser, and if you haven't already made up your mind about participating to DefInSpace, now you're sure. So now we will start with the presentation, The State of Space in the World from a Political Perspective by Mrs. Sourbes. So I leave you the floor, Mrs. Sourbes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is everybody hearing me and seeing my screen? I hope so.
Perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Well, so my name is Mme Sourbes-Verger. I'm a researcher at CNRS, and I've been working on the geography of the occupation of outer space, as well as the analysis of the space policies, mainly the Space Club members. I'm working on that since the 90s, which is a long time ago. So I have a quite personal experience of the evolution of the trends in the use of space, and to some extent I'm beginning to the old space and now I'm watching at the new space. Anyway, this kind of word, old space and new space, needs more definition. The last word, of course, sorry for the French accent, as you have already noticed. So just to give you an overview of the past, beginning of space occupation is the first in space, the first Sputnik, the first man, Gagarin, the first woman, Valentina Tereshkova, and at the end of the 60s, this wonderful time of a man on the moon, which is something which has never been done since that time. And now we are still waiting for a new woman and maybe not a new color person on the moon. So what we have to remember is that national security, national pride, and international image are very, very important incentives in the space policy everywhere in the world. And it's still true, as I will show you later. If I try to give you an overview of space exploration history, I will say that there is three big periods. One is space as marker of the Cold War. You are in a situation in which there is a duopoly on USA and USSR. The world leadership, which is a big issue of the years 1970s to 69, sorry, which means from Sputnik to Apollo, and then the issue of technological and economical hegemony. This is the first part of the Cold War, and this is very important for you to remember because very often you will see that there is a kind of projection or reproduction of this big framework of the Cold War to a possible competition between USA and China. And I want to stress that the situation is absolutely different. And it's mainly very different because at that time, at the time of the Cold War, space was really a part of the nuclear deterrence, which means that you cannot do nuclear deterrence without satellites. Satellites are also very useful and very important for science and exploration. Exploration to application with a new application satellite with telecommunication, Earth observation, navigation. The second main point during this period is the slowly opening up of the Space Club. France was the third space power in the 60s, but it's not really important. It's just one shot. In fact, in the 70s, we can look at China, Europe, India, beginning a true space power, which means beginning to master space access. And then you have the second part of the opening of the Space Club with Iran, North Korea, and South Korea at the end of the 90s, at the end of the 2008, 2009, 2010. This is the new era in today. I mean in the last 10 years, which is mainly characterized by the democratization of the technology with smallsat, CubeSat, open source, and maybe its small launchers in a very near future. We also have the emergence in the US, and I stress the fact that it is in the US, of new private players coming from the world of digital technology. Then we have to ask ourselves, what are the influence and the limits of this US model? I was just saying that prestige and sovereignty are still important drivers of national space policy. And I am not so sure that for constellations issue is at the core of your topic, but it's something that you must always remember, because in space policy, it's something still very present, even if you are not a space power, which means even if you don't are able to enter an access to space. And I think about the Emirate states, which have been considered as a space nation only with a mission to Mars, with a HOPE mission to Mars. Then, if we speak about stopping now. I hope you hear me again. So if we look at the budget in 2020, and it's the same today, you still have a huge difference between the USA budget and the budget of all other space nations. For instance, today we have a budget of about $60 billion for United States, and then the second budget is probably Europe or China. Anyway, it's about 15 billion budgets, maybe 20 billion budget for China. We don't know anyway, because there is no official budget of China. If we look at the third or fourth players, we have Japan and Russia. And it's still important today to remember that Japan has more or less the same budget that Russia. Of course, the big difference is that Russia is selling parts of their technology, which gives them some more money. Then you have the last part with India with $2 billion, which is very small compared to the $60 billion of the USA. So, of course, in the occupation of space, you don't have the same level of technology and the same number of satellites also. If we are stopping, I don't know if you are still hearing me.
Absolutely.
Are you hearing me again?
Yes, we can hear you very well, sorry.
So if we are looking at the satellites launched by nationality, this is a map I made for the years 2020. And what you can look at is a huge part of American launches, American satellites. Small satellites, mainly Starlink satellites, of course. And you can see that, for instance, in Russia, the main part of the launches made during that year, or 2020, has been European satellites, which is OneWeb constellation. So it's interesting to look at the map and to consider the very specific part of the US. And this is very important, because if we look at the year after, you can see that the situation is more or less the same. The difference today is that there is no more European satellites launched by Russia since the invasion of Ukraine. So what we have today, it's mainly an occupation of space made by US satellites, private US satellites, but anyway, US satellites. So the issue of constellation today is really an American issue. If we look at this slide, you can see what means the US hegemony. because considers that there is more than 6,000 satellites, which is a really very, very important part. And if we compare to Russia or even to China, and this is at the time today, at January 2023, we can take a big picture of what happens in space. Now, today, space is mainly a field of US activity. It does not mean that there is no other players. Of course there is. It means that Europe, China, even Russia, India are playing their own game on space, but they cannot be compared to the United States occupation level of occupation. The second part of my slide, which is important to remember, is a difference in the occupation of according to the different orbits. If we are looking at low Earth orbits, that you can see that they are the main place of occupation. Then you have some satellite in the MEO orbit, some very few in elliptical, and well, a quite permanent number of 500-600 of satellites in geostationary orbit. Now, taking into account the number of US satellites, what you will see is that it's mainly very quite at 80% commercial satellites, which is very important because a commercial system have their own logics, and of course they are depending on the government policy, but they just need authorization to be launched, and then they have been operated by the commercial themselves, which at that time mean especially SpaceX. So the main point to my presentation, if we are looking at the national space policy, is that I'm still stressing again that US is really a hyperpower in space. It's an hyperpower because of the outstanding financial resources, which means public budget, $60 billion, but also private investment. And if we are looking at the figures at the down of the slide, you can see that this investment in space is still growing and growing in favor of the United States, which means that in the next 5 to 10 years, the situation will be the same, with even a more predominant part of US satellites. Why is US space hyperpower? Because of the outstanding industrial capabilities. We are always speaking about the new players like Elon Musk, maybe Jeff Bezos in few years, but we must not forget the old one, which is Boeing, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, and all these actors. It's also a very, very important base of innovation. And this is also something that we have to take to keep in mind, because the future of space will be linked to innovation. And we can see with all the constellations that the small satellites with artificial intelligence are the new ways, the new trend of space activity. Then, a part of this commercial and civil activity, space is also a key element of the national security and the global leadership, which as the question is first takes all, which means what's the possibility for the new players in the space field to take maybe some specific part in the orbit's occupation, and maybe to have their own freedom to use space as they wish to do it. This situation is the same if we look at the commercial small sats, which are the main satellites used in space. And so what you can see is a big number, the huge number of OneWeb and Starlink commercial satellite. Look at these figures, and you can see really see this huge part of these two operators in terms of occupation of space and also in terms of new commercial policy, because constellations are mainly commercial activity. Of course, it's also a backup for military people. It's a way for them to have second option in terms of problems and threats on their military satellites, but it's first of all commercial and financial activities. Then look at Europe. This is important because Europe is a very different player of all the other space nations. The key word for Europe is cooperation. Cooperation inside the European countries and cooperation of Europe with foreign countries. So this is really something very, very specific, and we cannot think about space in Europe without thinking of cooperation, which means if you are in the trend of cooperation, national interest is, of course, the missing part of the European space policy. National interest is only related to the different countries of Europe, which mean mainly France, Germany, and to some extent United Kingdom, for if we consider that United Kingdom is still part of Europe, but it's in geography, of course it is. It's not the case for the European Union, but United Kingdom is still a member of the European Space Agency. So national states are the only one which are taking into account the national interest in terms of national space policy. Then we still have at the national states level the preoccupation of innovation. And innovation today is, of course, the keyword, the main trend in order to be a major player in the next few years. Apart of the national states, we still have an intergovernmental body, which is the European Space Agency. But European Space Agency is a research and development institution, which is mainly dealing with science and technology. The last one and the more recent one is the European Union, which have different concerns, some economical and regulatory issues. So if we consider the budget, for instance, the last decision of the European Space Agency has been a budget of $17 billion for the next 5 years. It's not an annual budget, it's a budget for the next 5 years. And we have in complement the budget of the European Union, about $15 billion for also the next 5 years. So you can see that even if we add the national space budget, we are still very far from the US budget. Now, what about China? Is China the new competitor of the USA? So I come back to my first point. We are not in the Cold War era of the beginning of the middle of the 20th century. We are in a new period of international policy, international relations, which means that we have a true competition on the ground between China and the USA about commercial issues and a lot of influence and leadership concerns, but we are not in the situation of the USA-USSR relationship. If I come back to the China space policy, I will say that the self-reliance path is really at the core of the China policy, because it was a decision of Mao Zedong and the beginning of the independence of China, but also because of the ITA regulation and the US policy, which is really taking apart China to the point that China has not been allowed to come as even as a guest to the International Space Station. There is no cooperation between the US and China on any kind of space activities. Now China is developing, it's becoming a true great power in space, and the new keywords are the military-civil fusion strategy, which means to try to use a duality, not as it was the case at the beginning of the space era with military capabilities becoming civilian, but in the case of China, it's more civilian or governmental capabilities being more and more military used. The reason is just that the military forces in China are still very far from a technological point of view of the US military capabilities. The limits of China, if we are looking at the competition with the USA, is that there is a very low financial resources compared to United States. And remember that the very outstanding level of the US budget is the same since the last 60 years. So it means that every year you have this huge difference between this huge gap growing between the USA and all the other space powers. You also have a very different private investment. The investment in US is very important and it's growing. The private investment in China is still very low, which has a direct influence, of course, in the development of constellation. The second part of the lower development of constellation in China is also the very low level of the private sector in the China national space policy. On the other side, the strength of China is that they have huge national needs. Application satellites are really vital for China in order to develop all kinds of infrastructure. The second trend is planification, which helps to keep the same trend in the programs. You don't have stop and go on any kind of program as we may have in the democracy. For instance, if you look at the moon programs in USA, you can see that according to the different presidents, you may have the will to come back to the moon, then the will to make research and development, or the will to go to Mars, and then to come back to the will to go to the moon. In China, the situation is completely different because the idea is to catch up, which means to be at the level of the first space nation. And then the second point, since Xi Jinping leadership, is to use space to accomplish the China dream. This China dream is to be one of the first power, not space power, but power in the world 100 years after the independence of China. Anyway, maybe it will be interesting to think a little more in the next 10 years or 20 years, and to think that this competition between China and USA probably cannot be the rule if we imagine a Mars exploration one day in which cooperation will look at the only way to do some kind of true Mars exploration, especially if we want to put humans on Mars. Today, we consider that space is congested, and competitive. This is a US national security space strategy, which put this point at the beginning of the floor in the 2011. Which means that there is a lot of risk. There is risk because of debris. These debris may be non-operational satellites. This may be also different kind of debris as a part of rockets, the first stage of rockets, or small pieces of material. It's important because this kind of debris asks the issue of the definition of weapons, what is a weapon in space. And some in the international negotiation, and you will see it in the next conference, insist on the fact that satellite may be weapons by destination. Any kind of satellites, if you change the destination of the satellites, may be a weapons. Anyway, if we consider the balance between risk and threats, we can see that, of course, some asset capabilities are mainly developing, but the main risk is still the risk of debris. When we consider the asset capabilities, this is a big distinction, which is kinetic physical, non-kinetic physical, electronic, and cyber. Probably that you will have some conference coming more into this different point. If I come back to your topic, which is the idea of constellation and the condition of space occupation, I just want to show you very quickly, which is a forecast for space occupation in the next 5 to 10 years. So you see that the main issue is low Earth orbit constellation, and you can see that this part of 2/3 of this occupation will be American satellites. Then if we look at orbit out non-circumterrestrial satellite, you can see that there is very few satellites. So this is not the main issue, even if you still have a very important part of the US. And then here you have all the others orbit, and you can again look at the importance of the US in this forecast. To conclude space security issues, so just to show you some kind of counter space capabilities, and this is something that you can find very easily in the report made by the Security World Foundation, and you can have the different kind of counter space weapons with their effects, which is very interesting for you because in your challenge you will still have to try to interpret and to analyze the different kind of attacks, the problem of attribution, and so on and so forth. So this is just a very short view on the different tables that we may have on counter space capabilities. But each kind of these space forces, military space forces, have very different characteristics and very different budget and very different capabilities.
So thank you very much. And now we will have some the presentation by Mrs. DeLaCasa, which is about pitching to investors. So I will leave the ground to Mrs. DeLaCasa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So hi everybody. I hope you hear me well. I don't know how many people are online.
We have around 41 people at the moment.
41. So it's a big audience. So very glad to be here. So first of all, let me introduce a little bit about what I do, introduce myself. So I'm part of the dream team New Space at the French Space Agency, CNES. So sorry, little adjustment in order that I see my slides. Okay, so you see me on the first rank here on the picture. So we are a team in CNES, and we aim to give some support for companies and especially young ones. So now today I will give you some tips about how to pitch to investors. So first of all, imagine that you are a young CEO, or young or not so young, but CEO of a company, a space company, and that you have to strengthen your balance sheet. That is to raise some money. So you have to go to see some investors and to explain them how they have to put money in your company. So this is a really critical stage of fundraising. The first, contact you have with investors. So the way you will prepare your pitches and the messages you will give through your pitches, this is very important. So I like to say that all the tips I will give you during these few minutes, but you could reuse them to prepare the pitches you'll have to do after the hackathon. So please listen to me very carefully, because I'm sure that you will be able to pick some ideas to be the best for the next hackathon. So first of all, dream big. So this is really very important point. You have to be ambitious with your project. When you are in front of investors, you have to make some hypotheses on sales growth, operating profitability, and to show them that there is a big potential for the money that they will put in your company. So that's really the first very important message I want to give to you. Think big, dream big, and put some high figures on your slides. So I know what you're thinking for the moment. Well, I assume that I know, because perhaps you think, well, if I put too high figures in my slides and too ambitious projections, forecasts, perhaps it's not credible, in fact. And so people will think that I'm saying, let's say, things that are not really, that have no ground. So the idea is not to be credible, but to highlight probable scenarios. That is, even if it is unlikely that in, let's say, the next 3 or 5 years, you'll have a turnover of 10 million, for example, there is a chance that you will be able to realize this turnover. So please highlight your high scenarios. This is very important. So it's all about the way you will explain that there is a possibility that you'll make this your forecast, in fact. So an investor is looking for a return on investment. So he wants to do 10, he wants to have a multiple of the amount of money he puts at the beginning. This is 10, for venture capital. So you have, he must have the chance for high exit, because he knows that there are some very high risks in putting some money in your company. But the risk must be compensated by the high exit, by the chance of the high exit he could have. So this must be clear in your pitch, that the investor, he must think that if you put a small amount of money, he can multiply this amount by 10 when he, let's say, when he will sell his part of the company after 5 years or some more years, because it's very long in space companies to have a financial return. It takes a long time to develop some products and so on. So keep this in mind, this multiple, this financial return for investors. Emmanuel Dojora is a senior partner in one of the funds we work with. The VC company name is Carista, and he says that investors make money on 10 to 20% only of their portfolio companies. So this is very important. So among all the companies they put money in, only 50. We have 50 to 70% of the projects that will fail, are mediocre successes. So he wants to know that if he puts some money, he will have the chance only for a few companies, a few startups. So keep this in mind. So in fact, you have really to understand this is business model. So I don't know if everybody knows what this means. This is for venture capital, that is private money for young companies with a large part of risk. You have a lot of literature on this point, and so I don't say long on this because we don't have a lot of time. So understand this is business model to put the good argumentation for them to put money in your company. So first question you have to answer during your pitch is, what problem do you solve? What is the context? What do your customer want? And what is your we have to understand that there is a plus, that what your company proposes is different, and that you have a value proposal compared with other companies. So now, second point, very important, is about the market. How is your market, and who will pay? Who will be your customers? So if you present what we call a niche market, that is a very narrow market, it will be difficult to justify your ambitious figures, for example, about sales. So you have to demonstrate that you have a depth, what we call a depth in the market, and that it's not a niche one. Then, very important point, your value proposal. How can you explain that the best solution is yours? That is the solution, the service of the product the company, your company proposes is different from the others because it answers the best to the needs of your customers. So this, let's say, value proposal point is also very, very important. Next point, what about your strategy? We have to understand what is your precise strategy to go to the market. That is to be able to develop, in fact, your first products or your first services, and how you will be able, with your skills, with your R&D programs and so on, how will you be able to sell something? Because sometimes it's not so easy at the beginning. Your readiness level is not so high, so it's difficult to imagine how you can go from a certain stage of development to a situation where you are able to sell something to your customer. So this, your strategy has to be very clear in order that we understand what kind of action you will take in the next 2 or 3 years to be able to sell something to your customers. So this point is really a very, let's say, a sensible one, and your slides, they must reflect this. Of course, very, very important point also for investors. This is really a point they look to. This is the quality and the skills of the team. We used to say that even if you have very high level technology product or very good idea about on the services you want to sell, if the team is not able to realize it, there will be a very, very big problem. So you have to explain your investors or let's say people you're talking with that your team is enthusiastic enough, has got the right skills, technical ones, soft skills, also the ability to deal with partners and customers. And you have also to demonstrate that you are able to have a vision on this. Another question your slides must answer to is what you call the MVP. I don't know if you're familiar with this subject, MVP, which is a minimum viable product. That is, at one point, you will have to stop your technical development in order that you will be able to sell your product. And so for this stage, how much money will you need to be able to have your minimum viable product? And that's also a very critical point to be coherent, in fact, and to demonstrate that the money you're asking for, fundraising or loan or public financing, it will allow you to develop your minimum viable product and to sell it. And that, I mean, your time to market, that is the time between the beginning and the day you will be able to put your product on the market, is coherent with all your other competitors, in fact. I don't know how many time I've left.
You've got a bit of time.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Then another question, which is very, very important for the investors, is what they call the traction. That is, you have demonstrated that you've got a market with enough depth to make a lot of turnover. Okay. You have demonstrated that you have a clear vision of the actions you have to put to sell your product. You have a good skills, good team. But do you have customers at the moment who answered to you? I mean, do you have a proof of concept? Do you have discussed and involved your customers in the definition of your products or services? And do you have signed with customers? So if you are in a stage of development when you have already customers, this is very important for the investors or for a public, let's say, institution like a CNES or French Space Command, because they know that you have already demonstrated that some real, and not paper ones, that some real customers want your solution, that they are interested in. So keep it in mind, the traction, and also the way, if you don't have already those customers, you can demonstrate that you are in a process in which you work with your future customers. That is what we call service design, user interface, user experience. If you work alone on a technical point, without involving your customers, the risk is that you develop something, but it's too expensive, it doesn't fit the needs of your customers. So that's also something you have to keep in mind, the involvement of your customers at the very beginning, at the first stage. I'm sorry, I know that I give you a lot of, let's say, ideas, and so don't hesitate at the end if we can keep some minutes if you want to ask questions or to contact me also directly, because we give to connect, we give some advice on this and some support. And so I have tried to, with this presentation, I have tried to give you, let's say, all the points, and then you choose among them and you can ask questions. So it's kind of overview I give you. So perhaps could be a little difficult for you to follow me, but well, let's try together. And it is almost the end of my presentation. This could seem obvious, but this is also very important. You have to gather information about the fund, about the VC firm, and about the people you meet. Which are the targets of the fund, the portfolio, companies they have invested in order that you have a lot of information and that you can understand what they are really interested in. A little bit of strategy with your, let's say, the different steps in raising funds. Please begin with pitching to investors that are down your list to train. Because if you go directly to an investor you're really interested in, it's not the good idea. So you have to test, to take one which is not, well, the one you want to have in the end. And of course, get trained. I mean, take advantage of all the support programs we have, incubation, acceleration, ISA incubation program, which is a, let's say, French budget, but we call it ISA, accelerators, all the support public and private companies can give you. Repeat it, and even for the pitch you have to do at the end of the hackathon. Please train it with other people. Take a little time to train it. Let me have a check. Yes, and also another point. Don't be perhaps in a hurry. It's better to prepare your slides and to prepare your what we call your business plan, and to have a very strong, let's say, basis with all your financial hypotheses prepared and settled, than to go without enough preparation. It's not very good, because perhaps you won't have a second chance. Because you must know that investors, they have a very big amount, a large number of companies who want to be financed. So if the first impression is not a good one, it will be very difficult for you to have a second, let's say, second meeting. So prepare the first one very carefully. And then make it easy for the investors to understand it. That is very clear presentation, clear slides with not too complicated, not too many informations. So if people you discuss with, they understand easily what you want to explain, it's always better. So make it easy for them to understand. And thank you very much. So I think compared with the time, we're good. And perhaps I will be very happy to answer to some of your questions, if you have any.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, Mrs. DeLaCasa. It was really clear, and I think it will be very helpful, whether today for the people live or later on for the people checking this presentation and the previous one remotely. So do we have some questions? Is it possible to, what you will do, if you have some questions, because we don't have some questions at the moment, someone maybe will want to ask you one question, Mrs. DeLaCasa, just send it to the email address I will give you at the end of this webinar, and I will transfer it to the different speakers, okay? And they will answer you directly. Otherwise, you can ask your question right now if you have one concerning the latest presentation.
Yes, don't be shy. Huh?
We have, will there be any investors on the jury? What is its composition? First of all, there is first the hackathon in November and then the final. So for the hackathon in November, depending on where you will pitch, the jury will be different. If you pitch in Toulouse, or if you pitch in Paris, or if you pitch abroad, the jury will be different, obviously. But we ask the different host cities to mix their jury, and hopefully some investors could be in the jury. It's not mandatory. Can Mrs. DeLaCasa do an example of traction in practice?
You can well, let's take a company selling, for example, a platform, satellite platform, like DefInSpace. At the beginning, you have the development stage. That is, you have plans, you have perhaps the in-orbit validation, demonstration, and now you are trying to find some customers, some real customers who want to buy your platform. If you present your company to an investor before the first sale, you will say, well, I've demonstrated some things, I've got paper, plans, perhaps I've had some meetings with buyers, with customers, but I don't have any contract. That's the first case, I mean, and then the investor says, well, okay, you tell me that you will be able to sell something, but you don't have any proof. You haven't proven anything from this. Second case, you have already a customer. That is, you have sold your platform to a customer. And then you can say to the investor, well, see, you see the contract, see my contract. I demonstrate that I have sold this platform at a certain price to this customer. So it's not at all the same configuration, same case. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, I think it was quite clear. When developing products that tackle the defense market, is it a good idea to pitch also to private VC firms?
Well, what we see, if we have a look on the young companies, on the startups in space now, we see that there are a lot of companies which are what we call dual, and especially if we look at the service part. It's not a very easy question for companies, the question of the financing, because you have a lot of sources. You can have, let's say, money from institution, governmental. You can have loans from banks. But the idea is to use the leverage effect. That is, at a certain stage, you will be able to be financed by an institutional, CNES, for example, or through France 2030, or I don't know, or through BPI innovation financing, let's say, tools. And then it's the right time also to go and see if you can have possibilities on private fundings. And private fundings today, this is for, let's say, a seed and early stage. This is so we. Yes, I think that if you want to develop your company, even on let's say markets, even on the defense markets, you have to use all the tools, and also private tools. That is private money coming from funds and from VCs. So that's my point of view. Then there is a question about, let's say, sovereignty and the owners. On some points, do we accept, in France, for example, that some strategic companies are owned, for example, by Russian or Chinese people, or even American? So that's very, very, very important point, because, well, I don't know if you want to add something, but for some very precise, let's say, companies, it's not perhaps a good idea to have people who own the company, which are from countries or private money coming from, well, countries, other countries perhaps than France, because they decide what they want to do with the company, for example. Perhaps you can add something, Pascal, on this point. Strategic products. I mean,
in our point of view, we are on the lookout on open innovation coming from the civilian sector. Okay. So we are looking for services, civilian services, which can be diverted for a military purpose, for experimentation. And then if we decide that this technology could be passed to the scale, we maybe military investors, for example, maybe PPI, could invest in French society to develop a sovereign solution or our assets. But for the hackathon, maybe candidate should think at start to build a civilian roadmap from the technology services they discovered in Constellation, and then think, military should be a client or a customer like the other.
Okay. That was my point at the beginning.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Veronique, to explain our candidate that they have to speak and think the roadmap before coming to a military authority to sell the product or the solution.
Thank you. The next question is CNES, can CNES provide potential investors, because it takes time to find a good contact?
So it's a good question, and thank you, because we created the Space Investors Club, which name is a Spacely. You can see on the last slide. We announced this at the IAC last year. And so this is a premium club of investors powered by CNES. And so we gather a lot of investors in this club. We organize some events. For example, in the frame of Le Bourget, we had what we call an after with almost 40 companies pitching in front of investors. And our aim is to facilitate the access for French companies to a private investment. And this is, so we are, we can, within this club, this basic club, we can organize B2B meetings, and we can put you in touch with the investors. So it's the beginning. It has been created only a few months ago, so we are not fully, let's say, effective, but we aim to do this. So the answer is yes. Alors, CNES and partners, of course, because we don't work alone in the frame of Connect. We have a partnership approach, and even within Spacely, we work in partnership with a lot of institutionals and private and so on. So we're not alone. This is powered by CNES, but not only CNES.
Okay, so that answers actually two questions at the same time. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I think it's over with the questions. I just want to thank everyone, and just to tell you that we will have, obviously we're just running a little bit out of time, but we thought it would be a little bit like this. So we will add the third presentation, which is about space law, very important presentation by Commissioner Anne-Sophie, sorry, from French Space Command. This presentation will be added to this webinar, and all of you who have registered to this webinar will receive it with the third presentation added to Mrs. DeLaCasa and Mrs. Sourbes-Verger's presentations. Okay, so now just to finish the webinar, I will just show my screen. If you just allow me 1 second. Thank you. I will just come back on the latest things to know before the DefInSpace hackathon. As you can see on your screen, you have now the dates, the next dates to remember before the hackathon. Actually, the next date is the hackathon on the 17th and 18th of November. So after that, if you are in the winning teams of the local editions or the winning teams of the digital edition, you will have the opportunity to go to Paris for the international semifinals and international final. This will be on the 12th of December. And at the end of this, you will have the possibility to win. If you win the first challenge, or if you win the second challenge, you will have the prize of going to French Guiana to visit the spaceport in Kourou. So this is quite a prize. I remember how the previous winners have told us about the experience of going to Kourou for the latest edition of DefInSpace. And when we say they had stars in their eyes, it's not a lie. So I hope you will be one of the winning teams of DefInSpace 2023. Until then, I just want to thank everybody who has been present today for this webinar. Thank you, Mrs. DeLaCasa. Thank you, Mrs. Sourbes-Verger. Thank you, Pascal, and thank you, Nicolas. And thanks again also to Commissioner Anne-Sophie, whose presentation, I said, will be added to this webinar, and you will all have access to it in the coming hours or next day, probably. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice day, and we'll see you later on the 17th and 18th of November for DefInSpace 2023.